The Maverick. Chapter 2. He lay, staring up at the hospital room ceiling. He still couldn't believe it. Couldn't believe that her memories still lived so vividly with him. Couldn't believe that each sound, each smell, each sensation of that day, that moment, still lived with him, inside him, so quietly that he'd never realized that he'd not yet moved on, away from that sight, away from her. And sitting there on that hospital bed, he saw her face again, just before he'd taken her away with him. The way the smile on it had crumbled as it gave way to the look of ghastly horror as her eyes focused on his face, searching. Her wide eyes spoke volumes as her mouth clamped shut. They were pleading with him. A sharp pain pierced through his chest and he squeezed his eyes shut, trying to make those eyes go away. If only he'd listened. If only he'd not let the madman inside him ride him that day. He hadn't deserved her. Not one day. If only he'd never met her at all. "So, you've come around then?" He started and looked up. A man stood in the doorway, looking down at him, one hand set in the pocket of his white lab coat, while the other held on to a file folder. A doctor. He was middle-aged, with strong features and a warm smile that did not quite reach his narrow, inquisitive eyes. Strive could detect a concerned look, like something was troubling him. Uh-oh, he thought, panicking a little. He shouldn't be here at all. He should never have been seen by a doctor. "I feel perfectly well," he said quietly. "I'd like to leave now." He looked up straight into the man's eyes. To make sure he understood, he was not asking, but merely stating what he intended. With that, he prepared to get out of bed. The doctor immediately jumped forward with a start, then gathering himself, closed the door behind him, and keeping his poise, strode up to the bed. He said in a grave voice, "Son, our reports don't quite coincide with that notion. The convulsions that you suffered cannot be accounted for, since there seems nothing wrong with you at all. Yet your body seems to remain under a constant activity that can be assumed to be the only factor that the convulsions can be attributed to." He paused, looking down at him closely. Strive kept his eyes lowered to his bare feet that were now on the ground beside the bed. His mind raced for ways to get out of there. "We believe that this rapid activity is too much for your body, and so it is reacting to it the way it would to, well, maybe a bad prescription." He uttered an ironic chuckle that made Strive's hair stand on the nape of his neck. Crap! The man was already too interested in this odd case. He had to get out of there right now, or it would be too late. He heard himself sigh calmly, utterly defying the sheer panic inside and his heart thudding against his ribs. "So what now?" he asked, still not looking at the doctor, staring instead out of the window on the other side of the room. "We'll obviously need to carry out a fair number of further tests." The doctor paused. "If you remember the name of a family member or friend, we'd be happy to contact them for you. We would have already, but couldn't find an identity on you. Thank God for hope. Further procedures may take some time, and you'll have to stay here until we've taken some more samples," he explained gently. Like that's happening, he thought savagely. He mumbled a number and moved to settle back under the covers. "I'll send in a nurse shortly," said the doctor, and then went out quietly, closing the door behind him. Old fool! I didn't even ask him what was wrong with me. Without thinking twice, he grabbed his clothes while shuffling out of his hospital gown. After getting dressed, he emerged from the room, looked around, and found the long, dim corridor empty. He wondered what floor of the building he was on. He could spot no elevators as he hurried down the grey marble floor, his sneakers squeaking. His heart drummed in his ears so that all sound apart from his own squeaking sneakers was drowned out. His hands were sweating, but he didn't dare look back as he scrambled in front of doors, looking for a way out. Just then he heard the blink of an elevator car stopping down the other side of the hall. His head snapped to his side at the sound, but he couldn't wait to find out who it was. He broke into a sprint and skidded to a stop down 2 doors and rammed himself into the third. When he realized it was an emergency stairwell, he flew down and did not stop until he reached the end and stormed out into the wide alley that the door at the end opened into. He was probably at the back of the complex. He was out of breath, his sides ached, and his hands were shaking. He had no idea how many floors he just sprinted down. He waited and listened for a few seconds. When he heard nothing, he pulled his jumper off and wore it back on inside out. Then he hurried down the wide, winding alley, pulling his hood up as much against the biting cold that suddenly stung the bare skin of his hot, perspiring face as against possible recognition. The disappointed doctor was sure to have raised an alarm, he mused dully. Follow Chapter 3 in the next video upload on Saturday, the 1st of October 2011. Thank you.